Let's bring in our panelists here. Spencer Critchley is joining us, the author of Patriots of Two Nations, Why Trump Was Inevitable, How We Can Reunite, and David Cohen, political science professor at the University of Akron in Ohio. Hey, David, I'm going to start with you today. Good to see you on a Friday afternoon. First of all, we're going to hear from Joe Biden coming up in about 3 hours or so. What do you think he's going to say?
A lot will depend on whether or not the networks call the election for him. I believe the networks feel that Pennsylvania is outside really the margin of error and really outside the comfortable recount percentage, I think they may give it to him. And if that's the case, he may declare victory. Otherwise, it may just be kind of an update and, proclaiming once again that, his job is to kind of bring the country together after a pretty divisive campaign and to tell people to remain patient while all of the votes are counted.
Spencer, you've worked with presidents in the past, so what do you think Joe Biden will say, needs to say?
I think we'll see more of the Joe Biden we've seen throughout the campaign and really throughout his career. This is a person who actually understands public service and understands what leadership is really about, which is serving the people. And so I think we'll see more of his calls for unity and his appeals to the better angels of our nature, to quote Lincoln. Whereas, we've seen so much of the opposite of that the past 4 years. And I think that Joe Biden understands his first mission is to try to work to heal this terrible division that we see in the country right now.
Okay, David and Spencer, I want to get both of you to react to what we heard from the president, this pretty astonishing news conference. Some networks actually didn't even show it because they said it was too corrosive to democracy. One of the things I thought was interesting, there were many things that were interesting, but David, the use of the word found ballots, they're finding ballots everywhere. They found ballots here and they're cutting into my lead. And some of that language that was used, rigged and fraud and stealing elections and all that sort of stuff. Some have called this the most embarrassing, address ever by a president, the worst ever, disgraceful. What's your take on what we saw?
Yeah, I agree with all those assessments. It's dangerous. It's incredibly destabilizing. It's deplorable. The language he is using is very much hurting the American political system. It's undercutting people's faith in the electoral system. And it's language that he's been using, let's face it, for 4 years, even after he won an electoral vote victory over Hillary Clinton. One of his first comments that he made was about the fact that he lost the popular vote, and there were somehow 3 million fraudulent votes, I think, in California. So he has a history of doing this. He doesn't care about the political system. He doesn't care about the country. He only has a long list of his own personal grievances that he likes to air. And I agree with the assessment that the speech that he made on election night in the East Room and the speech that he made in the press briefing room were just completely out of bounds, and he's unhinged.
Yeah, and you've got, the seal, the presidency, of course, as well, Spencer. And again, this idea, they're finding ballots. And I correct me if I'm wrong, but the message there seems to be, that these are phony ballots that are sort of being rolled out to swing the election in favor of Joe Biden.
Yes, and it's all completely invented, which is typical of the worst sort of demagogue, which is what Trump is. He's a classical demagogue. This conspiratorial thinking is one of the chief tools of the demagogue, is to exploit the fear of shadowy conspirators lurking everywhere, and he is our only defense against them. Another tool in the tool set is to destroy faith in the media or any other source of information except the demagogue, who presents himself as the embodiment of the nation itself and basically trains his followers to identify themselves with him as well. It's a quasi-mystical religious kind of relationship that he forms with his followers. And this is how he gets away with saying things that are, of course, just flagrantly untrue. And in fact, the more flagrantly untrue they are, the more it boosts his power while it's working. One of our hopes, though, is that what happens with demagogues is that when the end comes, it comes very quickly. It all falls apart. And I think that's what we see happening now.
Speaking of the end, I'm curious, David, when you think we will get, an end result here, because, we see all the trend lines. They're becoming ever clearer by the hour which way this is going to go.
I think by the end of today, we're going to have a call on this. I think Pennsylvania is clearly going to be in Biden's column. His lead is only going to grow. There's 300,000 some ballots left to be counted, but they are mostly in Democratic areas, including the Philadelphia region. And so I think there's going to be a lot of pressure for them to call the race, and I think the country is waiting for a result, and I think it's important that they give some sort of resolution to this election.
What about the threat of lawsuits, Spencer, and whether that's all just political theater and noise, or is there some merit to it?
No, these suits are just desperate and groundless, and they've been being dismissed one after another. Thank God that our most important institutions, for the most part, remain resilient, including the courts, despite his and the Republican Party's efforts to game those courts and turn them into just another set of political organs. Similarly with our military, thank God they understand their loyalty is to the Constitution, not to any one person, especially this person. So no, those suits are going nowhere. There was a judge in one of them just the other day who reminded the Trump administration lawyer presenting his argument, understanding that you're in court, speaking as an attorney, which was a warning to him that you'll be sanctioned if you go too far here. Do you really want to say that? That's an indication of how meritless these suits are.
David, what about recounts? Wisconsin, Georgia, potentially Pennsylvania?
Historically, recounts rarely result in the overturning of an election result, especially when we're talking about, significant margins. And I don't think, Wisconsin, Michigan, I think those margins are well beyond the point where we really need to fear a recount overturning the results. What we really do need to fear, though, is the fact that a very angry Donald Trump is going to be in office until January 20th. And that's something that hasn't been talked a lot about. But the fact is he will still have all the full powers of the presidency. And there's a lot of damage that can be done from now until then.
Yeah, let's talk about it, Spencer. You think it's going to be scorched earth? I mean, if we end up in that place where Donald Trump is, still the president until the 20th of January, refuses to concede, refuses to accept his defeat, and therefore, he and his administration just refuse to play ball with Joe Biden.
No, I would fully expect the president to continue on his destructive path, and I would expect it may become even worse as he goes through what psychologists call decompensation. This is a very damaged human being, in my opinion, and at an important level, I feel compassion for him, despite all the damage he's doing, because I'm convinced he must have been severely neglected and abused as a child. He shows all of the signs of somebody like that, including the apparent inability to feel compassion or even to understand the inner states of other people. So as his fragile ego falls apart, we've all seen how it needs to be propped up daily with external validation. As that all falls apart and he confronts his worst nightmare, becoming a loser in front of the entire world, I'm afraid I expect things to get even worse. Furthermore, even when he's no longer president, he's in effect a one-man media empire. His reach exceeds the reach of a great many major broadcast networks. He will continue to do damage, I'm convinced, as long as he's alive and able to.
So, David, your read on that, the idea of a one-term presidency, which is obviously embarrassing for anybody, including somebody like Donald Trump, and whether he tries to create some new role for himself, again, just to be careful here, if we get to that point of almost a alternative president or a shadow president. I've heard that term used as well.
Absolutely, and I agree with everything Spencer said. And I think for sure he would set up some sort of alternate universe. There's been talk about him starting a broadcast network, but his social media reach, I believe he's got 88 million followers on Twitter alone, and that is a tremendous platform with which to for him to essentially spread his message. And I can see him daily putting out tweets in order to stay in the public eye. Also, one thing that I did hear today too is they're actually considering having more rallies in the next few days, which just is mind-blowing, considering that each of these rallies is a potential super spreading event, and as COVID is really blowing up in this country. And so it just shows how incredibly selfish and irresponsible this president is.
Yeah, more rallies, and even to hear buzz about Trump 2024, maybe Don Jr., maybe Ivanka, if not the Donald himself, so to speak. So the other thing is, there are still 70 million Americans, gentlemen, who voted for Donald Trump, give or take. And I'm curious, they're not just going to go away. Some of them, maybe not all of them, but many of them may well believe this has been rigged and stolen from them. What happens, to sort of the political landscape given that, Spencer?
Well, this is basically the subject of my book, and as I say in the book, however this election were to work out, this problem will be nowhere near solved. We'll be trying to solve this problem for years to come. And my argument is that this is a division that has existed since the founding of the country, and it's a split between two fundamentally different worldviews, two different ways of perceiving reality, hence the two nations I refer to. And I actually think that Democrats, liberals, moderate conservatives, sort of we descendants of the Enlightenment, have played an important part in creating this division by not understanding the other worldview and why it responds to somebody like a Donald Trump. And, there's really no way that moderate conservatives to moderate liberals should ever lose elections to somebody like that in any modern democracy. The fact that it could happen indicates that we created a void that allowed him to step into that void and exploit it.
Yeah, and so, many books, David, such as Spencer's, have been written about this, in the aftermath of 2016, the people who felt neglected and forgotten and made fun of and left out, rallying behind Donald Trump. It's not like they're now suddenly going to feel like, oh, we're part of the conversation now. We got our president and, we're going to accept defeat and, we'll try again next time.
Yeah, I agree. I think Joe Biden and President Biden will reach out to those folks, but I don't think he's going to get much of a reception. The fact is, Donald Trump in many ways is a cult leader to so many of his followers. And they range from, QAnon conspiracy folks, to those that have, grievances against the system. I just don't know how easily it'll be to reach out and bring them into the fold. Certainly, a lot of people that voted for Donald Trump were Republicans that were voting for a platform. And those I don't see as the issue. It's the true believers. I just don't see a path to bringing them more into the mainstream.
Yeah, we were talking about the Mitt Romney tweet before we brought you gentlemen into the conversation. So, Spencer, what does this mean for people like Mitt Romney, but other Republicans, too, who, perhaps some of them privately were hoping this would be an overwhelming defeat for Trump? It has not been that. And before we know what's exactly going to happen, the president still has a lot of support. So where does the Republican Party go from here? Does Trumpism lives on? What does that mean?
Right. I think there's a very big difference between Trumpism and what we think of as the Republican Party. Although the Republican Party has been devolving towards this state, I would say, for decades, certainly since the 60s. And we're seeing really extraordinary numbers of Republicans who still believe in the rule of law and the Constitution, renouncing their party, as we've seen with the Lincoln Republicans and many others. I think we should have seen more. I don't see a future for the current version of the Republican Party. I think it actually needs to collapse under the weight of its own corruption. And there's a distinction even there between the party and the people that it is currently in the business of exploiting. There are lots of people who support Donald Trump out of what they're sure are good and righteous motivations. Those people are being exploited by dishonest media and dishonest politicians. And that's a big part of this problem. Thanks to modern media technology, it's possible to essentially hack people's, the way people perceive reality and spin an alternate reality around them and exploit their worst fears and illusionary hopes. And that's the only business the Republican Party in its current form seems to be in, which is a terrible shame since that it was the party of Lincoln. There was a time way back when the Democrats were the bad guys, basically. The Democrats were trying to protect slavery. Boy, has that ever changed. And the Republican Party is just, I think it needs to collapse and be replaced by something else. Yeah, last word just to you, David, if you can, in about 30 seconds. What do you think? What next for the Republican Party? Yeah, I think they're headed for an internal civil war.
I think establishment Republicans are going to try and take the party back from the Trump wing. But the problem is, the tentacles of Trumpism are pretty deep. And I think one indication is you can see Senator Ted Cruz yesterday and Senator Lindsey Graham, going all in on Donald Trump's voter fraud claims. And I think this is simply an opening salvo to the 2024 presidential primary, and they want those Trump-based voters as part of their support.
David Cohen joining us, Spencer Critchley. Gentlemen, thanks for this great conversation. Appreciate you taking such a big amount of time to come on the show and give us your take on this.
Thank you.
Glad to.